In the spring of 539 BCE, a man named Megacles stood before the assembled citizens of Athens in the Agora, the city's central marketplace. He had committed no murder. He had stolen nothing. He had broken no law that we would recognize today. Yet within hours, over 6,000 Athenian citizens would vote to exile him from the city for 10 years. His crime? Being too influential, too powerful, too visible in a democracy that feared concentrated authority. This was ostracism, one of dozens of punishment methods that ancient and medieval societies employed before the prison became the default response to crime. For most of human history, the question, "What do we do with people who break our laws?" received answers that had nothing to do with cells, walls, or confinement. Instead, justice operated in full view of the community, transforming punishment into public ritual, social education, and collective affirmation of shared values. This documentary examines how civilizations enforced law before modern incarceration existed. We'll explore why ancient societies chose visibility over isolation, why shame often mattered more than pain, and what these historical methods reveal about the fundamental purposes of punishment itself. From the exile systems of Rome to the public humiliation devices of medieval Europe, from democratic Athens to the legal codes of ancient Mesopotamia, we'll trace how human societies have addressed transgression across 3 millennia. But before we can understand these specific methods, we must first examine the worldview that made them logical, even necessary. Because punishment in the ancient world wasn't primarily about individual reform or rehabilitation, it served entirely different purposes that shaped the form justice would take. To understand why ancient societies punished the way they did, we must recognize a fundamental difference between ancient and modern thinking about crime. According to legal historian Harold J. Berman in his work Law and Revolution, published in 1983, medieval and ancient legal systems operated on the principle that crime wasn't merely an offense against individuals or even against the state. It was a disruption of cosmic order itself. The ancient Egyptians called this principle Ma'at, the divine order that governed both the heavens and human society. When someone committed theft, they didn't just harm the victim. They disrupted Ma'at, creating imbalance that threatened the entire community's relationship with the gods. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on stone around 1750 BCE in ancient Babylon, begins not with legal procedures but with religious declarations, establishing King Hammurabi as the enforcer of divine justice on earth. This cosmological framework had practical implications. If crime disrupted divine order, punishment needed to restore that order in ways the community could witness. Hidden punishment, private settlement, confidential justice. These concepts would have seemed not just impractical, but fundamentally wrong. How could order be restored if its restoration remained invisible? The Roman concept of pietas, duty to gods, family, and state, created similar dynamics. According to classical historian Mary Beard in her 2015 work, SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome, Roman law distinguished between crimes against individuals, called delicta, and crimes against the state or gods, called crimina. The latter category demanded public response because private resolution couldn't address the cosmic dimension of the transgression. Medieval Europe inherited and intensified this worldview. The medieval legal concept of the king's peace, documented in English legal codes from the 10th century onward, held that crime didn't just harm victims. It violated the sacred order maintained by God's anointed ruler. Breaking the king's peace was simultaneously a legal violation and a religious offense, requiring public demonstration that order had been restored. This explains why so many pre-modern punishments were theatrical, communal, and visible. The punishment wasn't primarily for the criminal. It was for the community, demonstrating that cosmic balance had been restored, that divine order still held, that the social fabric had been repaired. But what specific methods did these societies employ when imprisonment wasn't an option? The answer reveals remarkable creativity across cultures and centuries. The most common form of punishment throughout human history wasn't physical at all. It was economic. Legal codes from ancient Mesopotamia to medieval Europe reveal sophisticated systems of fines, restitution, and compensation that addressed most crimes without imprisonment or physical penalty. The Code of Hammurabi, preserved on a black stone stele now housed in the Louvre Museum, and contains 282 laws, and the majority specify economic penalties. Law 8 states, if a man steals an ox, a sheep, an ass, a pig, or a boat, if it belongs to the temple or to the court, he shall give 30-fold. If it belongs to a private citizen, he shall replace it 10-fold. If the thief does not have enough to pay, he shall be put to death. Notice the progression. Economic restitution is preferred, with execution reserved only for those who cannot pay. This pattern repeats throughout ancient legal systems. The principle wasn't vengeance but restoration, returning the victim to their previous state while penalizing the offender. Anglo-Saxon England developed this approach into an elaborate system called Wergild, a literally man price. According to legal historian Frederick Pollock in The History of English Law Before the Time of Edward I, published in 1895, every person had an assigned value based on social status. If you killed or injured someone, you owed compensation calculated according to these predetermined values. The laws of King Ethelbert of Kent, written around 600 CE and preserved in Old English manuscripts, specify exact payments for specific injuries. If a bone is laid bare, let 3 shillings be paid as compensation. If a shoulder is disabled, let 12 shillings be paid as compensation. The system covered everything from broken bones to insults, creating a comprehensive framework for resolving conflicts through payment rather than violence or imprisonment. This approach had profound implications. It meant wealthy offenders could literally buy their way out of punishment, while poor offenders faced more severe consequences. But it also meant most crimes could be resolved without state intervention, keeping communities intact and reducing the need for enforcement infrastructure. The Icelandic sagas, written in the 13th century, but describing events from the 10th and 11th centuries, illustrate how these systems worked in practice. Disputes that might today result in criminal charges were instead resolved through complex negotiations, mediations, and ultimately financial settlements overseen by community assemblies called things. But economic punishment had limits. What about offenders who couldn't pay? What about crimes so severe that compensation seemed inadequate? For these situations, ancient societies developed an entirely different category of punishment: removal. If economic punishment was the most common response to crime, exile was perhaps the most feared. To be cast out from one's community in the ancient world meant losing not just home, but identity, protection, legal status, and often the ability to survive. Ancient Athens developed the most famous exile system, ostracism. According to Plutarch's Life of Aristides, written in the 1st century CE, Athenian citizens would gather once a year and vote on whether to exile anyone they considered a threat to democracy. If 6,000 citizens participated, the person with the most votes against them had to leave Athens for 10 years. The procedure was remarkably democratic, but also remarkably harsh. Citizens scratched names onto pottery shards called ostraka, fragments of broken vessels used as makeshift ballots. These ostraka have been recovered by archaeologists, and the National Archaeological Museum in Athens houses thousands of them, bearing names of prominent Athenians who faced this democratic judgment. Ostracism wasn't punishment for crime in our sense. It was preventive, designed to remove individuals who accumulated too much influence before they could threaten democratic governance. The person ostracized kept their property and citizenship. They simply had to leave. But as we know from ancient sources, this exile could be devastating. To be voted out by your own city, to be told explicitly that your community no longer wanted you, inflicted psychological wounds that physical punishment couldn't match. Rome developed exile into a more formal legal penalty called exilium. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing in the 1st century CE, documents numerous cases of prominent Romans exiled for political crimes, treason, or moral offenses. Unlike ostracism, Roman exile was imposed by legal authorities, not popular vote, and came in varying degrees of severity. Some exiles merely had to stay a certain distance from Rome. The Latin term for this was relegatio. More severe was aquae et ignis interdictio, literally, prohibition of water and fire, which meant the exile lost citizenship rights, and anyone who helped them could be prosecuted. The most extreme form, deportatio, involved permanent banishment to a specific location, often a remote island, with loss of all property and citizenship. The island of Pandateria, are now called Ventotene off the Italian coast, served as Rome's most notorious exile location. According to archaeological surveys documented by the British School at Rome, the island contained luxurious villas where exiled aristocrats lived in comfortable imprisonment, cut off from Roman political life, but hardly suffering physical hardship. Medieval Europe continued these traditions, but added religious dimensions. Excommunication by the Catholic Church functioned as spiritual exile, cutting individuals off from the community of believers. Canon law documents from the medieval period, preserved in ecclesiastical archives across Europe, show that excommunication could be imposed for crimes from heresy to simple debt, and it carried devastating social consequences even beyond religious effects. But exile only worked for settled societies with clear boundaries. What about nomadic cultures, or small communities where exile wasn't practical? For these societies, and for crimes deemed too severe for mere banishment, physical punishment became necessary. Though even here, ancient societies showed remarkable sophistication in their approach. If exile removed criminals from the community, public humiliation kept them within it, while transforming them into living warnings. Ancient and medieval societies understood that shame could be more powerful than pain, that social death could be worse than physical suffering. Ancient Rome employed a variety of humiliation penalties. According to legal texts preserved in the Digest of Justinian, compiled in 533 CE, the Roman law distinguished between capital punishment and lesser penalties called infamia, legal infamy. Citizens convicted of certain crimes would be declared infames, losing the right to hold public office, testify in court, or serve in the military. They remained physically free but socially dead. The pillory and stocks, which would dominate medieval European punishment, had ancient predecessors. Chinese legal codes from the Han dynasty, documented in historical texts like the Book of Han, compiled around 100 CE, describe punishments that involved public display in wooden restraints. The purpose was explicitly educational, to show the community what happened to lawbreakers while forcing the criminal to endure public mockery and contempt. Medieval Europe developed public humiliation into an art form. The Statute of Labourers, passed in England in 1351, following the Black Death, mandated that workers who demanded excessive wages should be placed in the stocks for 3 days. This wasn't about the physical discomfort of sitting in wooden restraints. It was about the shame of having your transgression made visible to your neighbors, your family, your community. According to Peter Sperenberg in The Spectacle of Suffering, Executions and the Evolution of Repression, published in 1984, medieval punishment operated on the principle that shame was socially constructed. The criminal in the pillory experienced humiliation not because of physical pain, but because their standing in the community was systematically destroyed. Neighbors who once greeted them would now throw rotten vegetables. Children would mock them. Their family name would carry the stigma. This explains why public humiliation punishments were carefully choreographed. The day of the week mattered. Market days ensured maximum audiences. The location mattered. Central squares near churches meant everyone would see. The duration mattered. Too short, and the lesson was lost. Too long, and sympathy might replace contempt. The Saxon Spiegel, a German legal code from 1220, preserved in medieval manuscripts, specifies that thieves should be placed in the pranger, the German equivalent of the pillory, for 1 hour per stolen item, up to a maximum of 3 days. This precision reveals how seriously medieval societies took the calibration of shame. Too much humiliation might permanently exclude someone from community reintegration. Too little might fail to deter future crime. But public humiliation had a dark side that ancient societies recognized. If shame was the punishment, then shameless people couldn't be controlled. If community judgment was the mechanism, then outsiders, foreigners, and marginalized people existed beyond its reach. For these individuals, and for crimes severe enough to demand more than social consequences, physical punishment became necessary. Physical punishment in ancient societies served two purposes: immediate deterrence through pain, and long-term marking of the criminal's body as a permanent record of transgression. But even here, ancient legal systems showed more sophistication than modern stereotypes suggest. The code of Hammurabi's most famous principle, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, is often misunderstood as primitive vengeance. Legal scholars now recognize it as an early attempt to limit punishment, to establish proportionality. According to legal anthropologist Lawrence Rosen in Law as Culture, published in 2006, the lex talionis principle prevented excessive retaliation by creating a maximum threshold. You could take an eye for an eye, but no more. Ancient Roman law developed this further, creating the distinction between poena ordinaria, standard punishment prescribed by law, and poena extraordinaria, punishment determined by the judge based on circumstances. The 12 Tables, Rome's foundational legal code from 450 BCE, specified exact punishments for specific crimes, but judges had flexibility in application. Flogging was perhaps the most common corporal punishment across ancient civilizations. The Torah specifies a maximum of 40 lashes for various offenses, and Jewish legal tradition reduced this to 39 to avoid accidental violation of the limit. Roman law allowed flogging for slaves and non-citizens, but restricted it for Roman citizens, reflecting the legal hierarchy that governed all aspects of Roman justice. Medieval Europe inherited these traditions and added religious dimensions. According to chronicles from medieval monasteries, preserved in monastic archives across Europe, monks who violated monastic rules faced disciplina. Ritual flogging that served both as punishment and as spiritual purification. The physical pain was real, but the meaning was theological. The key distinction between ancient corporal punishment and modern incarceration lies in temporality. Flogging, beating, or even mutilation was immediate and finite. It happened, then it was over. There was no ongoing maintenance, no need for guards or facilities, no daily costs. The criminal returned to the community, marked perhaps, but free. This efficiency had appeal in societies with limited state capacity. Medieval kingdoms lacked the resources to maintain large prison populations. Corporal punishment allowed justice to be swift, visible, and cheap. But it also created problems. What if the punishment was too severe? What if the criminal died? What if mistakes were made? These concerns led some ancient societies to develop procedures we might recognize as early forms of due process. Before examining execution methods reserved for the most serious crimes, we must understand how ancient societies determined guilt. The assumption that ancient justice was arbitrary and capricious doesn't match the historical evidence. Many ancient legal systems developed sophisticated procedures for establishing facts and weighing evidence. The Athenian court system, documented in speeches by orators like Demosthenes and Lysias from the 4th century BCE, required juries of hundreds of citizens to decide cases. Trials were public, evidence was presented, witnesses testified, and elaborate procedures governed the entire process. The dicasts, or jurors, received pay for their service, ensuring that even poor citizens could participate. Roman law developed the concept of legal representation, allowing advocates to argue on behalf of clients. The works of Cicero, preserved across numerous manuscripts, demonstrate the sophistication of Roman legal argument. Complex rules governed what evidence could be presented, who could testify, and how judgment would be reached. Even trial by ordeal, which seems primitive to modern eyes, operated within structured legal frameworks. According to Robert Bartlett in Trial by Fire and Water, the medieval judicial ordeal, published in 1986, ordeal wasn't arbitrary torture, but a carefully regulated procedure used when other evidence was unavailable. The accused would undergo a physical test, carrying hot iron, retrieving objects from boiling water, and their guilt or innocence would be determined by how quickly they healed. The logic was theological. God would protect the innocent and expose the guilty through miraculous intervention. But procedural rules surrounded even this divine judgment. Priests oversaw the ordeal, witnesses observed, and strict protocols governed every step. It wasn't random. It was highly structured ritual designed to produce divine verdict when human judgment failed. Medieval Iceland developed perhaps the most elaborate pre-modern legal system, documented in the Gragas law code from the 12th century. Every free man had the right to bring cases before regional assemblies. Complex rules governed evidence presentation, and elaborate procedures existed for everything from property disputes to killings. The society functioned without a king, without police, and largely without prisons, yet maintained order through law. But what about crimes so severe that no punishment short of death seemed appropriate? Every society we've examined reserved execution for certain transgressions. The question is, what crimes merited this ultimate penalty, and how execution was carried out. The ancient world did not reserve execution for murder alone. Treason, sacrilege, certain forms of theft, sexual crimes, and even some commercial offenses could merit death. But the methods of execution and the publicity surrounding them reveal as much about ancient values as about ancient cruelty. The Code of Hammurabi prescribes death for numerous offenses, but specifies different methods for different crimes. Drowning for certain thefts from temples, burning for incest, impalement for tavern keepers who gave short measure. The method carried meaning. It wasn't arbitrary violence, but a symbolic statement about the nature of the crime. Athens executed citizens by forcing them to drink hemlock, a poison that caused gradual paralysis and death. The execution of Socrates in 399 BCE, described in Plato's Phaedo, illustrates this method. It was considered dignified, reserved for citizens, allowing the condemned to die among friends with time for final words. Slaves and foreigners faced cruder deaths: crucifixion, being thrown from cliffs, or simple strangulation. Rome developed execution into elaborate public spectacle. Crucifixion, reserved for slaves and non-citizens, was designed to maximize suffering and visibility. The condemned would hang for days, visible from roads, serving as warning to anyone who might challenge Roman authority. According to ancient historians, thousands were crucified simultaneously following the Spartacus rebellion in 71 BCE, their bodies lining the Appian Way from Rome to Capua. But Roman citizens faced different treatment. Beheading with a sword was considered honorable, quick, and reserved for those with citizenship rights. This distinction reveals how execution methods encoded social hierarchy even in death. Medieval Europe added religious dimensions to capital punishment. The idea that the condemned should have time to confess sins and receive last rites shaped execution procedures. According to Sarah M. Butler in The Language of Abuse, Marital Violence in Later Medieval England, published in 2007, medieval executions often occurred days or weeks after sentencing, allowing the condemned time for spiritual preparation. The key point is that even capital punishment in ancient societies followed rules, carried meanings, and served purposes beyond mere elimination of criminals. Death was never just death, it was statement, warning, demonstration, and sometimes even mercy. But across all these punishment methods, economic, exile, humiliation, corporal, and capital, one pattern emerges consistently: the absence of long-term imprisonment as a standard response to crime. Why? The answer reveals fundamental differences between ancient and modern societies. Ancient and medieval societies didn't lack prisons because they were primitive or unimaginative. They lacked prisons because imprisonment made no sense within their worldview and their economic constraints. First, the cost. Maintaining prisoners requires food, guards, buildings, and ongoing management. Medieval kingdoms operated on tiny budgets by modern standards. According to economic historian Douglas C. North, in Structure and Change in Economic History, published in 1981, medieval states collected perhaps 5% of GDP in revenue. There was no surplus capacity to feed, house, and guard large populations of criminals for extended periods. Second, the purpose. If punishment served to restore cosmic order, reinforce community values, and deter future crimes, it needed to be visible and communal. Hidden punishment behind walls defeated these purposes entirely. How could the community witness justice being done if it happened in secret? Third, the social structure. Ancient and medieval societies were communal in ways modern individualistic cultures are not. Your identity came from your membership in family, guild, village, tribe. Removing someone from community was itself severe punishment. Exile achieved this. Removing someone, but keeping them in the community, as imprisonment does, created a strange limbo that fit poorly with ancient social categories. Fourth, the alternatives. As we've seen, ancient societies developed sophisticated non-custodial punishments that served their needs effectively. Why invest in prisons when fines, exile, public shame, and corporal punishment accomplished the goals of justice more efficiently? The rise of imprisonment as the default punishment came only in the late 18th and 19th centuries, coinciding with massive social changes. Industrialization creating surplus resources. Enlightenment philosophy questioning public cruelty. Growing state capacity enabling long-term confinement. And changing ideas about crime as individual pathology requiring correction rather than cosmic disorder requiring ritual restoration. Understanding punishment before prisons reveals that incarceration is not the natural or inevitable response to crime. It is historically exceptional, culturally specific, and dependent on particular economic and social conditions. The ancient methods we've examined, economic restitution, exile, public shame, corporal punishment, and execution, weren't primitive precursors to enlightened modern justice. They were sophisticated responses to crime that made sense within their context. Whether imprisonment represents moral progress or merely different cruelty remains debatable. But one thing is clear. For most of human history, societies maintained order, enforced laws, and responded to transgression without the apparatus of prisons that we now consider essential to justice itself. In our next documentary, we'll examine one of these pre-prison punishments in detail, the pillory, a wooden device that stood in every medieval town square for over 6 centuries. What began as practical solution to crime evolved into elaborate ritual of public shame, revealing how medieval communities understood honor, reputation, and the power of visibility. The pillory's story illuminates the medieval worldview in ways no abstract discussion could match. Historical Justice releases new documentaries examining crime and punishment across civilizations every Tuesday and Saturday at 2 p.m. West Africa time. Each episode explores how past societies understood justice, what their methods reveal about their values, and what lessons remain relevant today. Thank you for watching.